What's up, gamers? Today I want to do a little video just kind of talking about some of the recent announcements and a little bit of a different setting. It's literally just me shifting my camera position. But today, it's been a couple days now since the Vanguard announcements that we had on the Tuesday, where they basically announced all of the new stuff. So basically we had the DivineZ announcement of the new anime. We had also a lot of the new mechanics, such as the energy cards, as well as the divine skills, and all that kind of stuff that was all kind of announced in one go. And I noticed that some of the people in the community have been kind of felt a little bit of information overload, and I can understand it a little bit, but I think it's also not necessarily as big. So because of that, I thought maybe it's a good idea if I sit down and talk about it a little bit with you guys in terms of my thoughts on all of these new mechanics. And honestly, not just the new mechanics, but also just all the news in general, because I think there's also a lot of stuff to break down in terms of the anime. And so perhaps that would be a good idea, and I hope that it's kind of useful to you. And also please go ahead and leave your thoughts in the comments below as well about all of these new changes and the things we're going to talk about. I'm going to be just kind of looking at my phone as we talk about this, because there's quite a few things that I think they announced that I want to break down. And there's a whole topic that I keep saying in each of these videos that I'll talk about in a separate video, which is of course their kind of new targeting of the younger demographic, specifically with the new Korokoro manga, as well as all of these like younger player, like middle schooler, primary schooler tournaments. That's gonna be for a separate video, because I think that deserves its own breakdown, because it's such a big phenomenon in the greater TCG community as a whole, not just for Vanguard in itself. So I want to leave that for another time, because there's been a lot of other moves from other card games as well to sort of push towards this point of like inviting kids to play card games again, which is, I feel like, a forgotten demographic. So we'll talk about that later. There was also the other Bushard announcements they made, such as a buddy fight tournament being held in the big card game festival happening in May. So a lot of people got very excited about that. Buddy fight was a trending topic on Twitter yesterday, one of the #1 trends actually. But I think just going over everything, I think the #1 first thing to talk about is I guess essentially just the anime itself. So DivineZ does feel like it's going to be a bit of a different feel and different kind of, vibe compared to the previous Overdress seasons. In case you don't know, it's still part of the same world. There are returning characters like barely aged up coming back into the anime too, and looks to be like they'll have very important roles as well. So, we've seen stuff like Taizo, we've seen stuff like Masanori as well. But I think the new protagonist looks really cool. His voice actor also is very passionate about card games, so I'm very excited about finally having a cast. I mean, he's an idol, so it doesn't feel like someone who can necessarily kind of like reach in person, but a very exciting and cool person in general that it seems to be very in love with TCGs and just kind of otaku culture in general, which was considered taboo in the idol industry. So it's pretty cool to have someone that's very open about that. Another point that I talked about on Twitter for a little bit is Lyrical being in main sets. So Lyrical being in main sets is like quite a big point, because it's not only the fact that Lyrical boosters will no longer be a thing, but it's also the fact that for Lyrical players now, they're gonna have to be always engaged, right? They're not gonna be the one nation that's gonna be kind of left out of the main playing field, and not being part of the, kind of like every 2-month releases. But Lyrical also now being part of main sets means that there is slots in the release schedule that have opened up, right? Because until now, we've had our every 2-month main sets, and then you would have in between that other product. So here we would see stuff like, Festival Booster, Triple Drive Booster, Starter Decks, Stride Deck sets, stuff like that. But then you'd also have to have like every 6 months there would need to be a Lyrical Booster too. And they clearly tried out Lyrical in Festival Booster as being part of a greater set, and it seemed to work out. So that's probably why they went like, okay, let's just ditch the Lyrical Booster idea. Like it's just, we did Lyrical boosters because Bermuda was always on its own, and it kind of felt like its own demographic. But also from a like content creator perspective, Lyrical boosters were horrible because people just don't care. Like the community generally just kind of zones out whenever Lyrical reveals are happening. So having Lyrical be part of the other 5 nations is really good, because that means that they're like all of the players will also have to be more aware of Lyrical as a whole. What this also means is that there could be potentially more premium product coming out in the future, as we've seen with the new Stride decks coming out. Not the standard Stride decks, but the premium Stride decks that were announced on a previous stream. So these are for like Revengers and Jewel Knights, as well as Musketeers. So for the 3 clans, it could mean that they can roll out more of these kind of products in the future too, which I personally find quite exciting. So I think that like no Lyrical sets means more than just the kind of like, oh, Lyrical is in main sets, right? It also means that of course there's gonna be more types of triples and doubles in booster sets, as we've seen from the set 1 product description, which I really hope means that the pull rate for foils in general has gone up. It's important to note that for both Shadowverse Evolve and Vice, they have changed the way that the packs and boxes are done now. So you get less packs per box, you get less boxes per carton, but the amount of pull rate of the high rarities is mostly the same, but the boxes are cheaper, the cases are cheaper, so you still get basically a playset of everything in every case. So they basically reduce the amount of lower rarity cards in order to compensate for this. Vanguard, however, has not done this, and the problem is that because of that, cartons for Vanguard will continue to be pretty expensive compared to the other Bushiroad games. And opening a Shadowverse Evolve carton after this booster pack change felt really good because there's very little dud. Like all of the common and like uncommon and rare slots are used very, very well. So basically every single like lower rarity card is a hit because it's something interesting, right? It's something that's used. Whereas in Vanguard, we've always seen this kind of bloat. So I'm wondering if they're gonna start, like, I feel like this would have been a really good timing to change that, and I'm surprised they didn't. So I hope they still do, because otherwise Vanguard's gonna be like, with them aiming to target more younger audiences again, the game has to get cheaper, right? Because otherwise the other Bushiroad games are more attractive to a younger audience that can only afford to spend so much on these hobbies. Especially when your competitors like Pokemon and Duel Masters in Japan. I'm not sure what Duel Masters is like equivalent would be in the English community that's like also like targeted to kids. I don't think it's One Piece, but when that's your competition, you have to be pretty aware of it. Then for divine skills, I've seen a lot of interesting discussion regarding divine skills. So if you don't know what divine skills are, they're basically going to be a once per game mechanic that you can use on the specific 6 cards that have been chosen to be like holders of divine skills. I don't think this will be restricted just to those 6 though. I feel like they will bring out more divine skill users in the future. But overall, I think once per game mechanics are pretty good because they also, like, you can design them in 2 different ways. You can make it as something that is like generically available throughout the game, which is what this seems to be, and you can make it something that is very high risk, very high return, like Zeroth Dragons were. But the former is something more similar to like V-Star powers in Pokemon. And I already saw some of my comments going like, oh, V-Star powers broke the game, V-Star powers almost killed standard. Like, I don't think we're playing the same Pokemon TCG, buddy. V-Star powers are basically most of the time very high utility. So basically they're from Pokemon TCG, which are basically a once per game ability that you can use. The most popular one allows you to search for one of any card from your deck and add it to your hand. The second most popular lets you search for any 2, but it's a bit harder to bring it out. But that's really good, right? Because if I have a once per game ability that I can use whenever I want, that means that if I can just search for any card from my deck, that means if I need a PG in this timing, I can search it. If I need Persona Ride for next turn, I can search it. That would be pretty cool. Other examples include stuff like they had a V-Star power that puts energy from your discard pile, attaches them to your Pokemon. So normally you can only attach 1 energy from your hand per turn in Pokemon, but that immediately would accelerate a bunch of resources. So, you know, that's stuff like maybe like stuff recycling from graveyard or adding stuff from drop back to hand. Again, it's a utility effect, right? It doesn't have to be something that like deals 6 damage to your opponent's Vanguard or anything. There was like turn skip ones as well, but they weren't that good. It would cost a lot to like, it was an attack that you'd have to like really like put a lot of resources into. So I'm curious to see which direction they'll take these divine skills into. I feel like, again, there was also Overturn and Buddy Fight, which I felt like was a lot more of that kind of like one-shotty type. But some of them were also kind of like defensive ones, like, you know, you don't take damage next turn or whatever. So they could do stuff like that. Again, I'm very curious to see what they're going to do with it, but I hope that they explore this space carefully and in an exciting way. But overall, I'm excited for it. I think it's a very high skill expression kind of mechanic. So for that reason, I think it's quite cool. Next, of course, the changes to the ride deck and main deck specifications, as well as the going first and second rules. So going first and second being now whoever wins rock, paper, scissors gets to choose is very good. I saw some people go like, oh, it's going to be too hard for beginners because how are they supposed to know if their deck wants to go first or second? And they won't, right? For the time being, you can usually assume as a new player in a card game that in any game, going first is good because that's how card games are built, in that the player that gets to do their thing first usually is going to be an advantage. Now with the energy cards, that might be a different story going into standard, and a lot of decks already wanted to go second, like Stride deck sets. But I think overall, you can just kind of like, if you're new, just go first. Like, don't worry about it too much. But I think it adds a really cool level of complexity that, for example, Shadowverse Evolve has, that where you win the dice roll and you immediately have to go like, oh my god, like, do I want to go, like, my deck, like, technically going second in Evolve is quite good because you get a lot of stuff similar to the energy cards, but a lot of decks still want to go first despite what they lose. So it's like, there's a lot to think about in that sense. So, but that is a good thing. It's good that there's a lot to think about. It's good that it's a complex decision. I think for especially existing players, it's a very, very appreciated addition. The 50 card main deck change is really good. I think that it definitely felt like not only restrictive, but the main deck being 46 cards meant that triggers were appearing at a much higher rate, especially with a mulligan. So now you just sacking your opponent or checking OT very early is not going to happen as much unless your deck is like deck thin supreme. This also might reintroduce some of the slower decks back into the format as well. So I think that just for that reason, it is a very welcome change. And a lot of decks, like if you're kind of confused on what cards to put in for your new extra 4 deck slots, just put in generics, right? We have the cats from set 12, the ones like the defensive cyclers. We have the ride deck discard cyclers. We have the grade 3 cyclers from set 13. Like there's a lot of cyclers in this game. And so if you're confused on what to put in, just put in those, but a lot of decks will be appreciative of the extra space for parts, such as Jiva especially can play more prayer dragons, more Varinas. You have space for Regulus pieces now finally too, so stuff like that is very appreciated. I think I'll probably make, you know, still some deck profiles obviously for like set 13 and stuff. We're gonna do some meta-analysis content that's like targeted mostly at our worlds. That will still be going with the 46 main deck rule, but I think going forward from January onwards, I think once we start tackling stuff from that new meta onwards, I'm definitely gonna just kind of stick to the new 50 main deck rule instead. So expect a lot of content with that in mind. There's also the reprints, of course, for the OTs, especially Pharaoh and Valnot. Very appreciated, very cool. The only concern here is that they're reprinting 8 OTs, and so in a case, you're probably expecting to only get like 3 of each, I guess, right? Because, no, I guess a carton is what, 20 boxes, I think? So if it's 20 boxes and there's 8 OTs being reprinted, that basically means that you can't actually have 3. So you're gonna have 2 of most of them. You can have 2 of each and then a third of some random. So I hope it's like a third of the good ones, like Pharaoh, Valnot, Dragveda, and I guess like Eldobreath. That would fill it up. I guess that would be a good case ratio. PGs are good too. You're gonna probably get a lot of PGs because of course they are probably gonna be 1 per box as well. But I mean, you can never have enough PGs, you can never have enough triggers. So like reprinting those is always good. And then Energy Generator. So Energy Generator and energy cards in general, I saw quite a few different takes. I think the main thing being discussed that feels like it's taking away from the more interesting discourse is the fact they don't allow dice. They don't allow you to use your own stuff. That part I also agree with. I think it's quite annoying. I think Bushrod should just kind of listen to the community being quite upset at it. And they have 2 different paths to take. They can either choose to allow us to use our custom things, or they can immediately announce that they're making stuff for this. So for example, for Buddy Fight, there used to be these Buddy Fight gauges, right, that we used to be distributed. So you can have a Buddy Fight life counter that was official, and it was like a little like scrolly thing that people use for like MTG life trackers. So they could introduce stuff like that, or they could even make their own like, you know, custom product trackers that they kind of like give out at events or sell or do as like box toppers or whatever, right? But I think they could just kind of release cool stuff. This is a cool new like merchandising idea. And so I think that it would be cool if they allowed custom ones as long as they maybe follow a certain pattern. But if they don't, then please make your own stuff. Like please make things that aren't just like Dawn card copies. And the stuff that comes in the quick start decks doesn't look that exciting too. So just like, please make cool stuff, right? If you make cool stuff, people won't complain. You could literally make like unit themes, like you make deck boxes and playmats and sleeves, just make like custom unit like energy trackers. I think that would be quite cool. But overall, I think energy cards are a very cool and interesting idea. I saw some people going like, oh, I don't like there's a mana based system now in Vanguard. I don't look at this as mana whatsoever. It's not that you need to use energy to play the game. The game is still played under the same rules of like Vanguard grades going up, Counterblast being the most important resource, but it's just a new resource. And I saw, you know, some Vanguard boomers, of course. I'm also a Vanguard boomer, right? I've played since the very start. I'm just an old man here. Old man yells at cloud, but I saw, you know, some people that are definitely less open to new things, a bit more conservative, being like, oh, I want the old days back when it was just 50 cards and no orders and no G-Zone and no crest and no nothing, just 50 cards, old-fashioned Dragonic Overlord swing face. Like, honestly, I think that Vanguard back in the day was fun for what it was, and yes, it was an interesting time, but I would not want to play old Vanguard in the modern era. It was fun for its time, but honestly, I like when games innovate. I like when games add more new things. And I feel like every single game has this argument. Like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Always has this, right? Where it's like, you constantly have people going like, no, I want to play God, or even like Edison and stuff like that. The game was better this time, that time. It's like, I think that adding new things is interesting. Yes, it adds a bit of complexity to it, but I think that the game also has to keep up with the innovators of the scene, right? One Piece literally has innovated with a lot of really cool new gimmicks, and if you can take some things from, you know, some of their good lessons, then might as well do it, right? So I personally think that if you are really against all of this new stuff, you're not, like, this game isn't your job, right? Games are meant to have fun, or they're there for you to have fun with them. So if the game isn't fun, or if suddenly the addition of a couple new gimmicks isn't for you, then maybe this is just the game for the next generation, right? The kids of today seem to like it, right? So let them enjoy it. I think it always sounds a bit harsh to say it's like, oh, you know, like it's you're past the time, buddy. It's time for you to go to the retirement home and like play mahjong. But I just feel like sometimes I feel this way about certain games too, right? With Yu-Gi-Oh, I really enjoyed it during up until the toss format. Modern Yu-Gi-Oh, I don't really, like, I boot up Master Duel every so often and play it. I'm just like, this isn't for me. And that's fine, right? It's like, games are for all kinds of different people, and there's so many different games out there. You don't have to force yourself to play this. Luckily for you, Vanguard has 3 formats. If you want to play a game with like no real much extra stuff, just play V, I guess. So that's kind of like a bit of an extended argument about all of that. Overall, I think energy is cool. I do wish it was usable in premium in some form. It's a bit of a confusing message where they're trying to release new entry product into premium, so they're clearly not leaving the format behind, but then they make this new gimmick that would be really cool if it was also usable in premium. But some people are also happy. Like I saw Kai in my chat, he was basically saying that like premium already has so many complex gimmicks and stuff going on for it, it's fine to let standard have something exclusive to it. So I kind of agree with that too, personally. And I think that more or less wraps it up for all of the new stuff, right? I think there's honestly, while there is quite a lot of new things to talk about, it's not really that confusing. So I hope that this video has helped a little bit to clarify some things for people that were a little confused about certain things or another. Other than that, I'm very excited for the future. I mean, I think the most refreshing part about all this for me was that this is finally a new series product stream that doesn't feel like we're risking a reboot. A lot of the previous ones were always like, oh my god, what if this is like, you know, like when Will just came out, it was like, okay, this is just like a continuation, there's nothing new being added. And then in V series, it would be like, type 2 workers get hype. It's like, this is not hype. This is finally one where it's like they're adding new stuff to the game, so it feels like when they announce like Legion, or even, I don't think it's as big of a jump as we went into G, but it's pretty close. It's like in between Legion and G, somewhere in the middle, where it's like, cool, standard is evolving. It shows a commitment that that standard is the main way to play the game and is going to stay that way. It feels like there's zero risk of reboot. It's all just building on the current cool stuff. What I'm curious about is because the current power level of standard is relatively high, but I think it's at a good high. I wonder how these new cards will be designed, right? Are we going to just kind of like stay at this plateau of the power level? Like I think people see Shirone top a lot, but then they do print new cards that just kind of like beat the matchup. I have friends like running Marphonica that just kind of like stomp Shirone's left and right. So it's not like those top decks of the meta are unbeatable either. So I'm curious to see where things are going to go. But anyway, this has been a long little discussion video. I hope you've enjoyed having this little ASMR in the background. I think that we're going to leave behind the new topics, right? This all of this new stuff for a little bit, because we're not going to get any information for this new stuff for a while, right? Like it's actually none of this is coming out for another month. The rule changes aren't happening in Japan for another month either. So for the time being, let's just focus on the present, right? We have a lot of stuff to talk about for set 13 meta. That's going to be the meta for World 2. And also, of course, there's a lot of other stuff happening in the community. So let's take a look at all of that for the next few videos going forward. But I still want to talk about this new stuff with you guys too. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And of course, if you like the video, give it a like. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe. And if you want some bonus content, feel free to become a YouTube channel member. It really helps to support the channel. And I upload some exclusive videos for YouTube channel members only. But with that, that's going to be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.